My fiancée cheated with my brother. She got pregnant and my family blamed me. But when years later they came begging me to raise the baby of their betrayal, I gave them the answer they never expected and left them speechless. I'm 30 years old, work in corporate finance, and I need to tell this story because what happened 2 years ago basically destroyed everything I thought was my life. And the truth is, I only now feel like I can talk about this without my stomach turning. I guess I should start from the beginning, when everything seemed perfect. Or like, when I was so naive, I thought my life was going exactly where I wanted it to. I was engaged to Samantha. We'd been together for 3 years and had planned the wedding for 2 months out. One of those medium-sized weddings with like 150 guests, a nice venue, all that stuff. Samantha was 27, worked in marketing for a clothing company, and I thought she was the one. You know what I mean? It was one of those relationships that felt comfortable, stable, like everything just flowed. I was buried in work, pulling overtime because they'd just given me a big project and I wanted to prove I could handle it. And she understood. Or so I thought. The thing is that right at that moment, like 2 months before the wedding, Samantha got laid off from her job. Something about budget cuts. I don't know the exact details, because when she told me I was in the middle of a crisis at the office, and I basically just told her not to worry, that we'd be fine on my salary while she found something new. So Samantha decided to sign up for a pottery class. I remember thinking it was a good idea, like she needed something to do, something creative so she wouldn't go crazy sitting at home all day. And this is where things start to get ugly, because it turns out my brother Ryan was also taking that same class. Ryan is 27, 3 years younger than me, and he was always the family favorite, that type of son who can do whatever he wants and mom always finds an excuse to defend him. When we were kids, I was the serious one, the responsible one, the one who got good grades and followed the rules, and Ryan was the charismatic one, the fun one, the one who got in trouble but always came out fine because Mom, Dorothy, basically treated him like he was an eternal baby. My father, Paul, never said much, just nodded along with whatever Mom said, and I learned from a young age that in our family, what Mom said was law. So anyway, Ryan and Samantha meet in this pottery class and start becoming friends. At first, it didn't seem weird to me, honestly, because Ryan was always sociable and Samantha needed to meet new people after losing her job. What did start to seem strange was that Ryan started showing up at my house all the time. And when I say all the time, I mean like 3 or 4 times a week. He'd show up with beers or Chinese food and stay late watching movies with Samantha while I was at the office or locked in my study working. Samantha told me Ryan was just being a good brother-in-law, that it was nice they got along well. And I, like an idiot, believed her because it never crossed my mind that something could be happening between them. They were my fiancé and my brother, Those are supposed to be the 2 people you can trust most in the world. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. There were signs. I guess, like Samantha, started dressing up more when she knew Ryan was coming over, or like they'd laugh at inside jokes. I didn't understand, or like she was suddenly always in a good mood when he was around but distant with me. But I was so buried in my work world, so focused on that damn project I thought was going to change my career, that I didn't pay attention to any of that. It was the classic case of the guy who works so much he loses sight of what he has at home. Except I didn't know what I had at home wasn't mine anymore. The night everything exploded was a Tuesday. I remember perfectly because I was supposed to be away on a business trip until Thursday, but the meeting got canceled at the last minute, like at 4 in the afternoon, and I decided to go home instead of staying at the hotel. I didn't tell Samantha because I wanted to surprise her. Maybe make up a bit for all the nights I'd come home late or hadn't come home at all. I got to the house around 7 in the evening, opened the door expecting to find her watching Netflix or something, and the first thing I noticed was there were 2 wine glasses on the living room table and Ryan's jacket thrown on the couch. I don't know how to explain what I felt in that moment. It was like my brain split into 2 parts. One part that was trying to find an innocent explanation, like maybe Ryan came to drop something off and already left, and the other part that knew exactly what was happening but didn't want to accept it. I went up the stairs and I could hear noises coming from my bedroom, from our bedroom, and every step I took felt like my legs were made of lead. I opened the door, And there they were, in my bed, in the sheets I had bought, in the bedroom I paid for, and they just froze, looking at me. What happened next was an explosion. I literally lost control, something that had never happened to me in my life because I'd always been the calm brother, the one who thought things through, the one who solved problems with logic. But in that moment, there was no logic. There was only rage. A rage so big, I felt like it was going to split my chest open. I lunged at Ryan and broke his nose with one punch, and I would have kept hitting him if Samantha hadn't gotten between us screaming. I yelled at them to get dressed, to get out of my house immediately, and Ryan was there bleeding and trying to say something, but I didn't want to hear anything they had to say. I literally kicked them out, threw Samantha's clothes out the window, yelled at Ryan that I never wanted to see him again in my life. And when they finally left, I closed the door and just sat on the floor of the entryway, unable to process what had just happened. I called my parents that same night because I thought, naively, that they would support me, that they would understand the magnitude of what Ryan had done. My mother answered the phone and I told her everything. And you know what her first reaction was? She asked me if Ryan was okay, if he was hurt, if they needed to go see him. She didn't even ask how I was, didn't ask if I was okay, if I needed anything. Nothing. She only cared about Ryan and his damn broken nose. I told her I'd been betrayed in the worst possible way, that Ryan had slept with my fiancée in my own house, and she started with excuses, that surely it was a mistake, that these things happen, that Ryan was going through a difficult time in his life, and probably seeking comfort, basically turning Ryan into the victim of the situation. 2 weeks later, Samantha contacted me saying she wanted to talk. I agreed because part of me needed answers, needed to understand how we'd gotten to that point. We met at a coffee shop near my office, a neutral place, and she showed, "Come up with Ryan." They both arrived together, as a couple, and that hurt more than I expected. They sat across from me and Samantha started talking, saying she was so sorry, that she never wanted it to happen like this, that she and Ryan had fallen in love and couldn't help it. All those cliché phrases people say when they want to justify the unjustifiable. And then she dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. 3 months pregnant, to be exact, which meant it had been going on since before I discovered them, probably since they started taking that stupid pottery class. Ryan was sitting there not saying much, just nodding to what Samantha said, and I realized this hadn't just been one night of mistake. This had been a complete relationship developing under my nose for months. They told me they were keeping the baby, that they were going to be together, and they said it like they expected me to bless them or something. I told them I never wanted to see them again, that the wedding was obviously canceled, and that as far as I was concerned, Ryan was no longer my brother. Samantha started crying, saying she hoped someday we could be friends again, be family somehow. And I just got up and left without saying anything else, because if I stayed one more minute, I was going to say things I'd probably regret later. My mother started calling me constantly after that. Every day, sometimes several times a day, leaving voicemails, telling me I had to forgive Ryan. That family was the most important thing. That we all make mistakes. That the baby on the way was my nephew or niece and I had responsibility toward that child. She sent me long text messages quoting the Bible, talking about forgiveness and reconciliation. And when that didn't work, she started making me feel guilty, saying I was selfish, that I was destroying the family over my pride, that Ryan was suffering because I didn't want to talk to him. The irony that she thought Ryan was the one suffering didn't escape me, believe me. After 3 months of this, of the constant calls, the messages, my mother showing up at my office trying to convince me to go to the house to talk to Ryan, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was leaving. Not just moving houses or neighborhoods. I was leaving the city completely, starting over in a place where nobody knew me, where I wouldn't have to run into Samantha and Ryan at the supermarket, where I wouldn't have to hear my mother's sermons about family forgiveness. I told my boss I was willing to transfer to any of our other offices, and it turned out the office in another city, like 6 hours away, needed someone with my experience, so they offered me a position there with a small salary increase as a relocation incentive. My parents were furious when I told them. My mother cried, told me I was being dramatic, that I was running from my problems instead of facing them, that how could I be so cruel to leave when Ryan needed me, because apparently I was the one who needed to be there for Ryan in this difficult time in his life. My father basically agreed with everything she said, as always. I told them my decision was made, that I was leaving in 2 weeks, and that I didn't plan to keep frequent contact. My mother told me I was going to regret it, that someday I was going to need my family and they weren't going to be there for me. And I replied that they'd made it very clear that to them I wasn't a priority, that the only family that mattered to them was Ryan. I moved on a Friday in September. I hired a moving company, packed only the essentials, sold or gave away the rest, and left. The new city was bigger, more impersonal, and that was exactly what I needed. I threw myself into work, spent 12 or 14 hours at the office, and in my free time explored the city, got to know new places, tried to build a life that had nothing to do with my previous life. Eventually, they promoted me to senior manager. I got a bigger apartment. I started going to the gym, even dated a few people, though nothing serious because the truth is I still didn't trust anyone enough to have a real relationship. A year passed. A whole year in which I talked to my parents maybe 5 times. Short and awkward conversations where they asked me when I was going to come visit, and I gave them vague excuses about work. I didn't know anything about Ryan or Samantha. I'd blocked their numbers and their social media, and honestly, I'd managed to get to a point where I didn't think about them every day, where I could go entire weeks without them crossing my mind. And then, on a Saturday afternoon, someone rang my apartment doorbell. I opened the door, and there was Samantha. She looked terrible, like really bad. She'd lost a lot of weight, had huge dark circles under her eyes, and was carrying a small girl in her arms. A baby about 2 or 3 years old that I assumed was Ava, her daughter with Ryan. Samantha started talking hurriedly, saying she needed my help, that things with Ryan hadn't worked out, that he'd abandoned them, and she had no money, no job, nowhere to stay, and that she'd traveled 6 hours by bus to come ask me for help because she had no one else. I stood there in shock, unable to process that she really had the nerve to show up at my door after everything that had happened. I asked her how she'd found me, and she said she asked my mother, that Dorothy had given her my address because she thought I'd want to help her, that it was the right thing to do. I wanted to scream, to close the door in her face, but the little girl was looking at me with those big baby eyes, and it wasn't her fault to have Samantha and Ryan as parents. I told Samantha to wait there, closed the door, and took 5 minutes to breathe and think what the hell I was going to do. I didn't owe Samantha anything, absolutely nothing, but I also didn't want to be the type of person who leaves a woman with a baby on the street without any help. I took out cash, like $500 I had saved at home for emergencies, opened the door and gave it to her. I told her that was all I was going to do for her, that with that she could pay for a hotel for a few days while she figured out her situation, but not to expect anything else from me, that I had no obligation toward her or her daughter. Samantha started crying, saying she thought I loved her. How could I be so cold? And I replied that she'd destroyed any feelings I'd had for her the day she decided to sleep with my brother, and that what she was living through now were the consequences of her own decisions. I closed the door, and that was the last time I saw her. But the story didn't end there, because the next day, my mother showed up. Dorothy just presented herself at my apartment without warning. I don't know how she got my exact address or if Samantha gave it to her, but there she was, ringing the doorbell insistently until I opened the door. She came in, pushing me, literally, and started yelling at me about how dare I reject Samantha. That girl, Ava, was my niece, that she had my brother's blood and therefore I had responsibility toward her, that it was my duty as family to help Samantha get ahead because she was the mother of my niece and that made her family too. I told my mother she was completely crazy if she thought I had any responsibility toward the baby that resulted from Ryan and Samantha's betrayal, that it wasn't my problem that Ryan had abandoned them, that he should be taking responsibility for his daughter, not me. Dorothy started with the same sermon as always, that family is family, that we have to take care of each other, that I was being cruel and selfish, and how could I sleep at night knowing that an innocent girl was suffering because of me? I replied that Ava wasn't suffering because of me. She was suffering because of her irresponsible parents, and that if she cared so much, she could help Samantha, but I wasn't going to do it. The argument got ugly, really ugly. My mother said horrible things to me, that I was a heartless monster, that I'd failed as a son and as a brother, and that I was behaving worse than Ryan, because at least Ryan had acted out of love while I was acting out of hate. All that type of emotional manipulation she'd perfected over the years. I told her to get out of my apartment, that she wasn't welcome, that if she showed up again without invitation, I was going to call the police, and that as far as I was concerned, our relationship as mother and son was over. She left screaming that I was going to regret it, that someday I was going to need them, and they weren't going to be there. Basically the same threats as always. But what my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, is that after Samantha showed up at my door, something activated in me. A need to know what had really happened with Ryan, where he was, why he'd abandoned Samantha and his daughter. So, I did something I shouldn't have done. I hired a private investigator to find Ryan. It cost me like $1,000 and took 2 weeks, but the investigator found Ryan living in a small town, about 3 hours from where my parents were, living with another woman, some Jessica, who was 25, working at a mechanic shop and basically pretending his daughter with Samantha didn't exist. I don't know what possessed me, but I decided to confront him. I drove 3 hours on a Saturday morning to that shitty town, found the house where he lived according to the address the investigator had given me, and knocked on the door. Ryan opened, saw me, and the face he made was pure panic. He knew exactly why I was there, and he tried to close the door, but I pushed it and went in. I told him he had exactly 1 minute to explain to me why he'd abandoned his daughter, why Samantha had to come ask me for help after everything they'd done. Ryan started with excuses. That Samantha was difficult, that the relationship became toxic after Ava was born, that he needed space, that he was going to start sending money soon. Pure lies, and I could see it in his eyes. I told him he was a piece of garbage, that he'd destroyed my life and Samantha's life for an affair that lasted less than a year, that he'd brought a girl into the world and now was abandoning her, and that made him something worse than a traitor. It made him a coward. Ryan tried to get defensive, saying, I didn't understand, that I'd never wanted to take risks, that I'd always been the boring brother, and that's why Samantha had fallen in love with him in the first place, basically trying to blame me for his own shitty decisions. I told him I didn't care what excuse he had, that that girl was his responsibility, that he needed to take care of her or at least pay child support, and he basically told me to fuck off, that he had no money, that he could barely support himself, and that I was the one with the well-paid job, that if I cared so much about Ava, I could help her myself. I replied that that girl wasn't my responsibility. She was his, and that if he didn't take care of it, I was going to do everything possible for Samantha to take him to court for child support. Ryan laughed, told me to do whatever I wanted, that he had nothing in his name, so there was nothing they could take from him, and that's when I realized there was no way to reason with him, that he'd really chosen to simply run from his responsibilities and build a new life as if Samantha and Ava didn't exist. I left that house feeling disgusted, but also, strangely, liberated. Because I realized that I'd spent more than a year of my life carrying rage and resentment toward Ryan and Samantha, letting their betrayal define who I was. And they'd moved on with their lives without thinking about me for even a second, well, until Samantha needed help and had no one else to turn to. I decided in that moment that I wasn't going to let this dysfunctional family keep controlling my life, that I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up Ryan's messes, that I wasn't going to let my mother manipulate me with guilt, and that I definitely wasn't going to carry responsibilities that weren't mine just because I shared blood with these people. I cut contact completely with my parents after that. I blocked their numbers, blocked their emails, and sent them a letter explaining that as long as they kept defending Ryan and trying to make me feel guilty for his decisions, I didn't want to have any kind of relationship with them. I don't know if they ever read the letter. They never responded, and honestly, I don't care. As for Samantha, I never found out what happened to her or Ava. I guess she eventually found a way to get ahead. Or maybe my parents helped her. I don't know, and I don't want to know. I refuse to carry that guilt. Now I'm 32, still living in the same city. They just promoted me to finance director, and I'm dating someone. Something casual still, because I still have trust issues, but it's something good, healthy. I do therapy once a week, and that's helped me process all this. To understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that I had no obligation to save people who consciously decided to hurt me in the worst possible way. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I'd married Samantha, if I'd never discovered the affair, and I realize I dodged a huge bullet. Because if she was capable of betraying me like that before the wedding, I don't even want to imagine what would have happened after. Do I regret how I handled things? Honestly, no. Maybe I could have been less violent with Ryan that night, though honestly he deserved that punch and probably more. But I don't regret leaving, cutting contact with my family, setting clear boundaries. I learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who are there for you in the worst moments, who support you when everything falls apart. And those people weren't my parents or my brother. I've built my own family now, with my friends here, with my partner, with the life I've created from scratch, and it's better than I ever imagined it could be. And that, I guess, is enough.